So today we're going to talk about some of the conspiracy theories that surround the Catholic Church and portions of the Catholic Church. This spawned from a Twitter thread that I will try to share below. I got to find it again. Where a Catholic, a supposed Catholic, left the faith in great strides of emotion and tears and all-encompassing emotions because she came across the fourth vow of the Jesuit order. Well, what she really came across was a fragment of forged fake documentation, which we'll look at. And then that spawned underneath it some, well, really 6 to 7 claims of things against Mary in the Catholic Church. The Jesuit order one is funny to me because it's the Monita Secreta, which was 1614 by Jerome Zahorowski, I think. He was an ex-Jesuit who was expelled from the order, and so he wrote a bunch of stuff against the order. And he's like, "Hey, I'm going to reveal the secrets," and blah, blah, blah. Obviously, the historical context of that, and there's internal inconsistencies, and rejected by all scholars. Blah, 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 blah. It's not even worth taking seriously or even looking at it. But the other ones were pretty interesting to me because I love conspiracies. This made me think of like the Templars and Assassin's Creed, like the games I played growing up, and the nuance of history that we kind of is lost and forgotten, and it's always mysterious. We love mystery until we don't. I just found it interesting. I thought it was worth talking about. So we're gonna do an overview of them, and then we'll probably do subsequent articles and videos, kind of like diving deep into them, so that we're able to really get into the nitty gritty. But the very first one is the origins of Mary worship, quote unquote. So Queen of Heaven, right? The claim is the title of Queen of Heaven ties Mary to pagan worship. The goddess of the Sumerians and others. The title Queen of Heaven is rooted in biblical typology, though. So in the Davidic kingdom, the Queen Mother, the Gebera, which I just said wrong because I have a cold and I can't do the was a prominent figure. You can look at 1 Kings 2:19 for this. But what's interesting to me about this, aside from Mary as the mother of Jesus, the eternal king of the Davidic line, so like the mom was the queen, right? The queen mother. So by just common Jewish necessity, Mary is the queen mother if Jesus is king. So if you want to deny Mary's queen, you have to deny Jesus is king, biblically speaking, right? So aside from that shutdown, they'll bring up Jeremiah 7:18 warns against the worship of this queen, highlighting a connection to pagan practices that provoke divine anger. The children gathered wood, and the fathers kindled the fire, and the women knead their dough to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven. So here's the fallacy that occurs. They say Queen of Heaven. Look, they call Mary the Queen of Heaven. That's in Scripture as a demonic thing, blah, blah, blah. The problem is terms Messiah, terms Christ, terms like God, even Elohim. All of these things are found in pagan culture and have demonic origins, quote unquote, if we're going to use that, if we're going to be consistent. The phrase the Christ is found in pagan culture as their own Christ. So if we're going to do that, then we can't call Jesus Christ. It doesn't make sense. It makes it falls apart immediately when you look at it just from a biblical standpoint. Then you look at it a logical standpoint, and it really disappears. But it is what it is. The next one. Oh, you know what? I forgot I had this slide. Let's look at this. So Mary is often compared to the ancient goddess figures like Isis. We mentioned some other ones. So this comes from Alexander Hislop, who wrote a book. I think it's called Two Babylons. I'm not sure if that was it. It might have been a different one. argue that elements of worship, art, and ritual intertwine these figures. Mary mirrors the pagan mother goddess. Unfortunately, like we just showed, it immediately falls apart within the biblical context and the logical deduction of that. So the very next portion we hop into is this 666. So the Vicarius Filii Dei, the Pope's title adds up to 666, the claim is, linking him to the Antichrist. That's not an official papal title, ever. It's made up. The phrase was popularized by anti-Catholic polemics, but it has no historical basis in any church document. While official titles like servant of the servants of God do exist, the one linking to 666 is not official and in zero documents. So it falls apart super fast. There is no legitimate notion that it's ever been used. There's no documents showing that's ever been used. Again, it's just like one of those. And listen, to be fair, like the Catholic Church did the same thing to Luther, basically. I mean, they were like putting out, Luther said this in newspapers, but Luther probably never said those things. It happens. The next one is Rome, city of seven hills, found in Revelation 17:9. So Revelation describes the whore of Babylon as seated in seven hills, which critics identify as Rome. In Edward Gibbon's book, he critiques the church for adopting Roman political and cultural elements, suggesting they are the whore of Babylon that sits on seven hills because they are in Rome. The Vatican, preserves ancient Rome through its rituals and architecture. The rituals one claim is just so weird. Like, you can't point to a single Roman ritual that's found basically within the Catholic Church. The architecture reinforcing narratives of decay and corruption, very lofty, but the imagery in Revelation is apocalyptic and symbolic. So while Rome could be associated with it, while it could be Rome, the church itself is distinct from the pagan Romans. So just because it's found there doesn't perpetuate that it's pagan. Simple logic. The blood of saints and persecution. So the Catholic Church has persecuted Christians and is guilty of shedding their blood. The description of the whore of Babylon doing this. The historical instances, thousands tortured for heresy and Inquisition, St. Bartholomew's Day of Massacre, thousands killed with the Pope's blessing, and the Crusades. So they're like, look, you guys perfectly fit. You guys are in Rome on the seven hills. You're the whore of Babylon, and you drink the blood, shedding the innocent blood. So they point to these three things. Oops. And we have a slide at the end. We'll talk about that. But the argument is that in Revelation 17, this is the Catholic Church. And then it goes on in Revelation 18, merchants deceive the nations. So this accuses Babylon of deceiving nations through commercial exploitation, linking it to accusations against the Catholic Church regarding its wealth. Avro Manhattan's argument in his book, or her book, I don't know, Manhattan claims that the Vatican has amassed one of the largest fortunes in the world, contradicting Christ's teaching on the poverty. The issue with this is every temple of the Lord ever has had massive amounts of wealth found within it. It depends on what you define as wealth. So the Vatican isn't spending money like that. They may contain paintings and treasures and things of past, just like every other temple that the Lord has had. We see this in Kings, we see this in Psalms, we see this in the writings of Solomon, we see it in Maccabees, and it's what you do with it. So if they don't consider it wealth, but it's sacred or it's history or whatever it is, that doesn't mean that it's being used in the name of wealth, which is contrary to poverty. So interesting little thing there, but they're putting this cumulative case against the Vatican. So, and the merchant nations also include the sorcery of secret societies of Freemasons. The church obviously teaches against that. That's in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which a house divided. Now, let's talk about that for a second, because I can steel man this and say, well, of course they're going to say that in their fronted communication in the catechism that they are against this stuff, but secretly behind closed doors, they are for it. And that's very possible. It's very possible. We'll look at some stuff that kind of makes that disintegrate. The controversy of indulgences, selling them, even though that was strictly in the German church, not anywhere else. So that's kind of silly. The spiritual exploitation here. Revelation 18 accuses Babylon of trafficking the souls of men. In David Yallop's How They Stole the Game, critiques the church's actions in colonized regions, arguing that it used religion as a tool to control and manipulate. Very interesting stuff. Don't just dismiss it because it's dismissible. Again, I can steel man a lot of this stuff. So then you run into the connections with Marian doctrines derived from the ancient Babylonian worship of the Semiramis and Nimrod, not from the biblical teachings. Again, we go back to Hislop and the implications of the claims that raise questions about the origins of certain religious doctrines and practices. So the image of Mary and baby Jesus resembles the ancient deities like Isis and Horus, is what they'll say, prompting questions about the broader context of symbolism. So, Mary worship and the Queen of Heaven accusation. Catholicism does not worship Mary, first of all. Hyperdula and even latria, even if you take away the hyper portion of this, is distinct from worship, which is given to God alone. The title Queen of Heaven is not pagan. We already talked about this. It is literally, if Jesus is king, Mary is queen. That's just it. It is what it is. The Canaanite goddess Asherah and actually Asheroth and all the other ones, no Israelite would have confused her with the Jewish concept of a righteous queen mother. Like, this concept of Queen of Heaven and Queen Mother would not be a dichotomy for them because they knew who the opposing Queen of Heaven. And even the word heaven there does not mean distinctly that created realm of God himself. It means the skies and whatnot, and other ancient Near Eastern context gives us that. So Hislop's The Two Babylons is widely discredited by scholars for its unhistorical methodology and conspiracy-style claims. Now, that itself is not something that dismisses it entirely, but there's no direct link between Catholic Marian devotion and the Babylonian religion. Absolutely not. The Council of Ephesus was interesting because they declared Mary Theotokos not to blend with Artemis worship. That's something I didn't say before. They say that Council of Ephesus was saying, okay, these pagans really like their goddess, so we'll make Mary a goddess and make her look like Artemis. But, to uphold, they wanted to create this god bearer name so that they would be more likely to convert. The issue with that is it's not exclusive to the region of Ephesus. And it was more, obviously, we know as an historian's theology. And Mary was just a byproduct of this. It was more about the Christology of things. But Mary, as the God bearer, precedes and expounds the area of Ephesus. So that just is outright refuted. The 666 argument. So we already talked about how it not being not an official papal title, but it's also cherry picking. So like Martin Luther, Ellen White, we can force numerological patterns into this that make them seem like the Antichrist. It's not hard to do at all. The donation of Constantine is indeed a forgery, but it was rejected by the church centuries before the Reformation. So Lorenzo Valla exposed it in the 15th century. So it's a pre-exposed thing from our time. Ellen G. White, a Seventh-day Adventist founder, had an anti-Catholic bias, which influenced her great controversy claims. So she herself created this, went off and created this new. It's very Mormon-esque in its nature, and obviously, she probably won't say much about the Reformed theologians. You notice that all these people actually attack the Catholic Church, which is very interesting. Rome is one city within 7 hills, but Jerusalem is also called a city with 7 hills. And many church fathers identified Babylon in Revelation as apostate Jerusalem, not Rome. So if we're going to talk about all the cities with 7 hills, we have to not just include Rome itself, but we have to also talk about Jerusalem. So if Rome is automatically the whore of Babylon because it has 7 hills, then Washington, D.C., Istanbul, and other 7 hill cities could be accused likewise. The church did not adopt pagan Roman titles like Pontifex Maximus in any theological sense. The Pope's authority is traced to Peter, not a political office. It's usually the contra. Drunk with the blood of saints, the killings, the Crusades, the Templars. The Catholic Church has been persecuted over and over by Roman emperors, English reformers, the French Revolution, communist regimes, Muslims. If persecution alone defines the horror of Babylon, why not apply the same standard to the Protestant England or Calvin's Geneva, which executed dissenters? Don't forget Calvin openly executed multiple people that he deemed heretics upon his own authority. The Inquisition's numbers are highly exaggerated, by the way. So modern historians estimate fewer than 2,000 executions over centuries, much lower than the violence of the Protestant Reformation. For reference, just go indulge yourself into John Knox. St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, the Pope did not directly order it. It was a politically driven event during the French Wars of Religion. And even if the Pope did directly order it, we have instances in the Old Testament of kings ordering mass executions and God actually saying it is a fulfillment. So we don't know. So stop speculating. The Crusaders' sack of Constantinople was condemned by the Pope. So outright refutation. The merchants deceived the nations. The Catholic wealth argument. The Vatican is not the wealthiest institution. Global corporations and governments far surpass it. Catholic wealth is not for personal enrichment, as I mentioned, but it's to preserve and maintain churches, hospitals, and charities, which there's open documentation on, but also to preserve history if they are collecting anything in the Vatican archives. Indulgences were never meant to be to self-salvation. Luther's grievance were about abuses within the Church of Germany specifically, and were corrected at the Council of Trent. The Vatican bank scandal involves modern financial mismanagement, not a proof of sinister global deception. The Catholic Church, this is the traffics in the souls of men. The Catholic Church was instrumental in ending slavery, with popes condemning the practice of 15th and 19th centuries. Fear of excommunication was meant to call sinners to repentance, not to control people. You should want to be in alignment with God's church, not outside of it. It should cause for concern, just like sinning should cause concern for not taking the Eucharist, right? Colonial missions were complex, so some abuses occurred. As we know, abuses happen, but missionaries also protected indigenous people, and you know, we have many examples of this. Protestant colonialism, British, Dutch, American, was equally exploitive, and if not more so. The connection to the Nimrod and the Semiramis, there is zero historical evidence linking Mary to this. The claim is based on Alexander Hislop's The Two Babylons, which is rejected by everyone, basically. The similar artistic depictions of mother and child, Isis and Horus, do not mean Catholicism copied them. Many cultures represent motherhood in this way. Mother of God is a Christological title, not a claim that Mary is divine. It was defined to affirm Jesus' divinity, as we talked about at the Council of Ephesus. If iconography, wow, I cannot speak, proves borrowing, then Protestant crosses are pagan because they similar symbols existed in ancient cultures. And again, this is like the numerological thing. We can always just point to something else. It doesn't define anything. So all in all, I don't think there's any reason to fret over these things, though some of them can be steel-banned to a certain point. Most of them are defined and refuted throughout history. Guys, I hope you found this helpful. If you did, leave a comment. If you have more questions and if you have concerns, if you want to fight back, I'm all for it. Let's talk.